bright colors, expressive characters, wacky Warner Brothers-esque animations, strangely relatable anthropomorphic animals. These are just a few terms to describe the different types of media I consumed in my youth, from cartoons to movies, commercials, and even toys. Of course, I think by now we all know that this probably definitely best describes my personal childhood library of video games. Actually, I guess that would pretty much also basically describe the games I'm currently playing. Wait, holy shit! The 90s was home to a wide array of super inventive IPs that, as I've said in the past, made huge strides in pushing against the preconceived notions and boundaries of what video games could do. The whole running, jumping, and shooting thing was taken to brand new heights in ways that would change the landscape of the whole damn industry. The 3D Renaissance led to revolutionary franchises that not only gave the red and blue titan himself a run for his money, but would go on to become damn near mythical in their own right, inspiring future gamers, artists, and everything in between. Despite many citing more jovial and childlike references when it comes to nostalgia of the 90s, those pieces of media are really just a few of many different facets of the era's culture. This definitely rings true when it comes to the video game industry. I mean, after all, the PlayStation was targeting the core market, the gamers, the dudes who bought accessories and didn't talk much at school and would grow up to write their opinions online. Oh wait, fuck. Sony's marketing for the PlayStation often did its best to poke the bear. One of their most memorable campaigns leading up to launch was, of course, "You Are Not Ready," the E being red for, like ready, whatever. So, as it would naturally follow, there's an entirely different chunk of the PlayStation's library that strived for less stylistic choices and went for more grown-up art and gameplay. This didn't mean that there's some great black and white divide between the two, of course. Games like Jet Moto, Tony Hawk, and Gran Turismo met everyone in the middle, with their gameplay and art being extremely accessible to people of all ages. Hell, I have pretty distinct memories of playing these with my family myself. I'm still awful at Tony Hawk. While these games were a bit of a far cry from the super abstract titles I've talked about before, they still don't hold a candle to the darker, grittier, adult-oriented projects that made their way onto the platform. These projects would include now legendary OG survival horror franchises like Silent Hill, Resident Evil, and even Dino Crisis. It was this slice of the PS1's library that had drawn a much clearer contrast between the more saturated color palettes and much more simplistically silhouetted E-rated demographic of titles. While games like Crash, Spyro, Croc, and Rayman used expressive facial animations with big eyes and mouths and much simpler texturing and detailing, the Big Kids games had a set of tropes entirely their own. Grainy, pixely surfaces intensified by the lack of texture filtering, flat, rigid faces, blocky armatures, and overall games that took themselves perhaps a bit too seriously. These different sides of the PS1's library would stand as a testament to the raw power, versatility, and support behind the machine. While it's pretty clear which games better stood the test of time, it's pretty widely agreed that these titles set in place the roots and standards for their respective franchises. So much so that we still compare every modern entry into the series to their original counterparts. But why? What about these archaic, clunky games generate such a steam even today? Well, I'm no scholar, but I've got a few ideas. The PlayStation's limited resources gave way to a rather unforeseen quality in these games. There's this strange, new, distinct, unintentional layer of meta-horror when actually going through these titles now. It probably sounds really fucking strange, but maybe some of you know what I mean. The blocky, almost nondescript environments paired with the paler, toned-down colors feel more like interpretations of what's really supposed to be there. And through that, the games somehow still feel immersive since the game makes a lot of room for imagination. It also explains the recent fascination in the trend of low-poly horror indies. Perhaps I'm getting a little ahead of myself, though. In my humble opinion, there's one game where this feeling is at its most powerful, where, on top of just being a fantastic game, Father Time has put an interesting twist on this classic platforming adventure. The ironic part is that it's not even a horror game. Yeah, I know that seems like a bit of a backstep from the spiel I just gave, but just stick with me here. This is a game that I both remember fondly and still scares the shit out of me. I'd say it's high time we pry into and rediscover a classic PlayStation artifact. Today, we're about to dust off Tomb Raider. The most well-known and respected titles on the PS1, Tomb Raider was yet another staple that further solidified and firmly planted the PlayStation's feet in the market. While it initially landed on the Sega Saturn for like 5 minutes, it quickly found its new forever home later on the PlayStation, boasting a technically superior port to boot. Yeah, the Sega Saturn got a tough break, man, at least in America. These days, it might be a little hard to make out the differences, but it was these differences that allowed Tomb Raider to really shine, and made the PlayStation look good too. Developed by Core Design and published by Eidos. Tomb Raider's puzzle platforming has its roots in games like the original Prince of Persia and Castlevania, with just a dash of Zelda. Tomb Raider takes these various tidbits of inspiration and launches it to unprecedented heights, combining the maze-like puzzles of yesteryear with brand new third-person 3D capabilities and adding a splash of atmosphere and character. In fact, Tomb Raider's protagonist had not only taken the world by storm months before its release, but she's gone down as perhaps the most iconic video game heroine ever. This is the game that introduced us to Lara Croft. Easily one of the most publicized and controversial characters in video gamedom, Lara Croft was Core Design's answer to the surge of strong female protagonists that had taken hold of the media landscape in the late 90s. Man, I miss those. I miss you, Buffy and Sabrina. Lara Croft had an especially powerful impact considering that the video game industry was pretty much dominated by the super ultra hetero-masculine Hulk man. In retrospect, it took Core Design some serious gonads to make their video game action hero a tough woman. While some argued that Lara Croft was over-sexualized, I would argue that she was also in fact a rich genius, archaeologist, gymnast, gunman. She could fucking beat your ass. So why can't she just be all of the above? I think it's pretty fucking neat that this character can thoroughly explain the Byzantine Empire to me while simultaneously crushing my windpipe with her enormous thighs. Hell, I might just try to enjoy those final minutes. Tomb Raider's also home to some very memorable cinematics. Fully rendered 15 FPS scenes that happened between chapters, as well as the intro itself. FMV quality really doesn't get more pure than this. Between the attempts at faces and the animations being slow and janky, Tomb Raider's intro is pretty adorable. And trust me, it gets even better as the game goes forward, trying to give us the full cinematic experience by slapping Lara into numerous tropes from its contemporary action blockbusters. Now, with this game seemingly firing on all cylinders, what with Too Cool For You cinematics and commercials, you might think that the experience is probably gonna follow along the lines of something like an older Uncharted. But actually, Tomb Raider's tone is much different, and the game wastes no time setting this up as soon as it starts. Once the first cutscenes are over and you get past this admittedly cool loading screen, the game just starts. You're instantly just kind of spat into this dark, dank, hollow cave. There is absolutely no music to speak of, and you're given no prompts on precisely how to proceed. You're just there. This is quite literally the first frame of the game, and it's already emanating this surreal, almost unnerving quality. It feels like something is working against you. When you take your first steps, for example, you're almost immediately greeted with a trap, arrows zipping back and forth across the hallway. Hard to dodge right away, and so you pretty much take a hit and lose health off the bat. And this is just the first hallway. Opening up to a larger chamber, we find where the real meat of the game comes from. Making your way through largely nondescript, decrepit geometry in the form of caves, ruins, and water. Oh god, the water. You are alone. No map, no direction. There isn't even a HUD, aside from the health bar and breath meter, which are completely unlabeled. It is here where Tomb Raider shines as what would be the perfect horror game. Wandering through the chambers, you are given absolutely zero hints. It's entirely up to you to explore your surroundings, discover the secrets, figure out which jumps to make, and figure out whether you're even going the right way. Okay. Okay. This is all made an even more daunting challenge when faced with the task of adjusting to Tomb Raider's sense of control. In this snowy chamber is where you get your first taste of Lara's controls, which initially seems severely outdated, but actually fits this game's atmosphere really well. Yes, it'd be easier to perhaps have full, regular 3D control like the other platformers on the PlayStation, but I've come to find that this restrained control scheme best represents the intended pacing in this game. So yeah, no shit. There's more labor required in learning and understanding the feel and the drag in Lara's actions, not to mention the button mapping. However, it's this extra bit of effort that makes me feel more connected to this protagonist in actual practice. After playing the game for hours on end, I found myself not just feeling like a confident player, but a confident Lara Croft, running and tilting left and right, jumping and holding X to extend my arms to grab onto ledges, rolling and maneuvering around obstacles and platforms. It all simply feels a lot more rewarding and accomplished with this control scheme. Instead of just tapping buttons here and there, which would probably be just fine, the added combinations of button presses and holds makes Tomb Raider feel like a game that involves me more. I feel disciplined. I feel like I'm actually doing something. It's an element that truly adds to the sheer tension of each jump and each move, and adds to the overall confronting atmosphere you've been presented with. In one way or another, each move matters. The lack of direction, ambiance, vague textures and geometry, paired with controls that require patience. It's this recipe that makes a large fraction of Tomb Raider this strangely introverted, intensely cerebral experience. Much more so than one might expect, especially when given its action-driven context in this game's overall marketing. However, this doesn't mean that the game is downright boring or outright creepy. Tomb Raider's heavily advertised explosive side is actually just as impressive as it looks. It's just a little more tense and less Quake than you might have expected. Core design makes some solid and genuinely exciting decisions that further flesh out the game's identity in ways that truly made it unique, in ways you might not see coming. One of the most prominent examples of these diverse design decisions is in the enemies. Some of your first enemies are tame enough. Wolves, bears, bats, standard dungeon shit. Later on, we're confronted with way more formidable foes like lions, and crocodiles, and gorillas. Getting caught in one of those herds means it's just time to stop wasting everyone's time and load your last save before you just embarrass yourself. Trust me, I would know.
Look at this, because I can't jump. I can't jump out of the way because I'm fucking cornered.
Battles and encounters in Tomb Raider, despite being fun, can be pretty unsettling. Enemies tend to come rushing at you when you're not looking. You might see one come from raw darkness or jump you from off-screen. Jesus, there he is! Despite the fun in games to be had with your Animal Kingdom adversaries, there's quite a plethora of different enemies that you'll face throughout the game, like other people. The human enemies in this game work fairly different. On top of not actually having anything to represent their health, they never actually die. For most of the game anyways. In fact, what actually happens is that they scurry off to a predetermined vantage point off-screen once they take enough damage. If you try to follow them, you will quickly find that you're apparently getting repeatedly ambushed by Harry Houdini's henchmen. One of these categories of enemies, however, is not like the others. It's this class of bad guys that, in my opinion, best personifies just what type of game you're playing. How do you top getting chased by a rabid pack of dogs? Enter dinosaurs. In Tomb Raider, one of your earliest enemies is literally dinosaurs. Actual, honest-to-God dinosaurs. Is this a thinly veiled attempt at cashing in on the whole Jurassic Park dino craze? Maybe, but it's still fucking awesome. This makes no sense and is completely jarring, but god does it kick ass to shoot these fucking raptors! I'm playing as this genius female bounty hunter wearing sunglasses with 32 Ds and dual-wielding pistols blasting away packs of ugly dinosaur bastards. Wow, this game does it all. Speaking of which, I believe there was in fact one enemy that truly terrified me. One that absolutely made little me never want to play this again. Oh god, wait a minute. I remember this place. Oh no, I know exactly where I am. No, you know what? Fuck it. I'm 22. I finally grown into this game's demographic age range. I'm going in. Oh shit. I think I hear it. Oh god, the music started. It's getting closer. Oh man. What the fuck is that? So, this is the T-Rex. This is the dude who scarred me and my sibling as kids. For some reason, I didn't remember him looking so toothy. He looks so fucking goofy. He's also kind of a thrill to take down. Dodging and weaving out of the way of this giant can get pretty intense, especially without health kits on hand. I distinctly remember watching my sibling go through these first levels long ago and being really intimidated and frightened by the thought of this tiny woman fighting these big-ass dinosaurs. In my young head, it felt like killing the T-Rex was this giant, triumphant, Dark Souls boss-like moment that took an hour. I just wiped this guy out in
32
seconds. Adulthood is truly one of the most disappointing moments of the human experience. It's also in areas like the T-Rex arena where the absolute uniqueness of Tomb Raider's design really shows. While the developers probably didn't want a black sky for what is most likely supposed to be this outdoor environment, in my opinion, I think that this limitation further adds to the sort of hostile, topsy-turvy surroundings that you've been placed in, contributing to that aforementioned feeling of being so very unwanted down in these tombs. The black void of a sky almost makes it feel like this giant forest area is also taking place underground. I actually think that would be really fascinating. The tombs in Tomb Raider carry on that feeling in a variety of ways as the game moves on. What's fascinating is that the game actually seemingly does very little to do this by providing a fairly minimalistic experience, which in turn serves to subtly generate anxiety. A pretty basic example of nearly all of the best concepts in the game comes from one of the more well-known levels from Tomb Raider, Parasite. The level starts underwater, transitioning from its preceding level, Colosseum, previously on Tomb Raider, and opens up to 3 different pathways, and each seemed to lead to further branch off into different rooms or different rooms with different entryways. It's never even clear which way to start, giving each endless hallway tension, making you question if it was even worth it. Is this a dead end? Am I going the right way? I came down this whole fucking hallway for a fucking health pack? Each path is dark and mysterious, and it is fully up to you, the player, to push yourself forth and explore. Tomb Raider teaches you to dive headfirst into situations and to quickly memorize and learn layouts, meaning you'd better sharpen up your sense of direction quickly. Palace Midas is a perfect example that not only has these super dense labyrinths, but the actual rooms themselves vary somewhat drastically in style. One of the most interesting parts, for example, is coming to the room with the grassy garden in the middle of this dark labyrinth. It's strangely serene and comforting, despite its presence alone being kind of unsettling. Rooms like these are fairly common and come in different flavors throughout Tomb Raider, breaking up the claustrophobic pathways by relieving some of that almost suffocating pressure. It's especially impressive when presented with these massive, high-volume rooms, sometimes feeling like canyons or valleys. I mean, I would be outright lying if I said I wasn't downright impressed by the sight of some of the structures you're presented with. Peru, Greece, Egypt, and Atlantis, the main continents of the game, all have their share of instantly recognizable moments and assets. Between something like the iconic waterfall in Peru or the Sphinx in Egypt, to the Colosseum itself, core design included plenty of spectacle, even more than I remembered or was even expecting. Tomb Raider uses its own space effectively, really making solid use of composition. So while you'll find yourself wandering around not really knowing what the fuck to do, you'll also find that each room you visit has a purpose, even if you find it out of order. Wandering upon different chambers feels super rewarding and presents you with actual discovery. I did this. I'm really here. I found this. Oh shit.
Every time!
Palace Midas also demonstrates this sort of mega puzzle. A puzzle that can only be solved by solving a bunch of smaller puzzles. These doors have symbols above them that correspond with a series of switches on the higher platform in the room, of which you have to do some precarious platforming to get to. These super puzzles are pretty complex and are generally used as the real center of whatever level you're on. I'm constantly finding myself in awe of core design's absolute ingenuity. Some of these puzzles had to have required some serious testing and incrementing. Sometimes it's as simple as dodging a T-Rex to get some cogs, sometimes you're traveling down a complex spiral hitting switches and opening doors, and sometimes it's just a test of sheer fucking will and patience. So you gotta put the switches in order of the doors, go through the doors, beat whatever you have to beat, which includes fire, giant swimming rats, giant metal spikes, general heights, get all 3 lead bars, and then head to Midas's room. This room, for as simplistic as it may seem, is actually one of the more memorable bits in the game. In the middle of the room lies a statue in ruins. All that's left are some legs with blocky feet and a giant hand. Instinctively, you might try to jump onto the hand. Doing so results in instant death by gold touch. Jesus fucking Christ. Pulling off a bone-headed stunt like this will fill you with instant shame and regret. Shame that yes, you in fact just did that. Regret over getting slingshotted way the fuck back to your last save point. Yep, it's one of those. Tomb Raider's difficulty stems from making some precarious jumps, fighting off possibly every single natural predator known to man, and dying a painful, shameful death. Dying in this game is absolutely crushing, and that has everything to do with the save system. Saving in Tomb Raider is one of the few things that feels the closest to a traditional video game, both in appearance and mechanic. Spaced out far and few between tombs, Lara can walk up to one of these loud, conspicuous save crystals and save her progress. In the beginning, it's pretty funny to feel super immersed in the game, only to run headfirst into a giant floating purple crystal. For a second, I thought I was playing, well, it was certainly jarring. However, as the game goes on and you start to realize how precious these are, it's a little more like you see one and you start sweating. Whew. Okay, all I gotta do is get from right here, where I'm standing, up there, without getting crushed, mauled, or breaking my fucking legs like twigs. It's like walking a tightrope, and the gorilla behind you is just fucking shaking the rope, and the lion in front of you is holding the rope with his teeth, and Fox is just on the other side of the room just fucking blasting away, raising your damage. So saving is pretty important. So instead of them being linear as you progress, they'll be bunched up together in close proximity, so on blind playthroughs you won't really know if you should use some of them now, later, or before or after whatever puzzles you might end up facing. So the challenge comes from resisting the urge to save out of playing it safe. Tomb Raider is all around just a completely unforgiving game. It's made known numerous times that your feelings or skill level play a very small part in Core's vision. You'd better make that jump at the very fucking edge, or you'll pay for it with your spinal cord. You'd better learn where those enemies spawn and mind your surroundings, otherwise it's dinner time for Mighty Joe Young here. You'd better run for your fucking life, because that's a really big rock. What? Oh my god, that is actually a mummy. Tomb Raider, if you haven't picked up on it by now, has no fear of shying away from supernatural elements. The plot device itself has a godlike power inside of it, originating from Atlantis, being unearthed because humans keep setting off bombs that are too graphically complex for the actual game and only fit inside FMVs. As Tomb Raider progresses, things become a lot more dangerous and definitely a lot weirder. As you slide and jump and shoot your way through the 4 continents, you'll find that each area is a steady incline of more and more absurdity. However, I'd say things take a bit of a really strange turn once we hit Egypt and Atlantis, Tomb Raider's endgame. Naturally, endgame means we find ourselves in some serious hijinks, like mummies. And what the hell is that? Late stages contains some of the most disturbing imagery on the PlayStation, and yet they're rarely ever talked about. Core design just throws us into this H.R. Geiger hellscape 22 years before Agony and Scorn. It wasn't uncommon for action games in the 90s to feature sacrilegious imagery, i.e. Doom, but Tomb Raider's execution completely blindsides you. Doubling down on the unsettling, lonely nature of the previous rock, stone, and sand levels, Tomb Raider does a nosedive straight into the macabre, replacing those textures with skin tissue and throwing you into combat with actual body horror. We can literally compare these monsters with those of Resident Evil and Silent Hill. To say Atlantis is jarring is an understatement. On the PC version, if you listen closely, you'll even hear the sound of a heartbeat being played for the entire level. It's also this level that brings us to our climax. Jacqueline Nadla, the woman who commissioned you to find different pieces of the Scion, you know, the plot device we were collecting for the entire game. Well, as it turns out, she's pretty old, like really fucking old, and has been in cryostasis for like forever. And that big old bomb we saw in the intro was her alarm clock. She wants to use the Scion to create an army of muscly Cronenbergs. We obviously can't let that happen, so I'm just gonna take care of this real quick. Jesus! And there she goes. What commences after this? On its last leg, breathing its final breath, Tomb Raider finally throws everything it can at us. This is the Great Pyramid. This final trial is the hardest challenge in the entire game. Here we go. Oh my god! Fuck. How the fuck was I supposed to know that? I couldn't even fucking see that! That was really fair and I saw that coming! Fuck! 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 Oh my god, wow, what a very well-designed level. This is so good. Core. Design? No! Combining everything you've learned in the game and throwing it all at you in one last great hurrah, Tomb Raider's finale is the test of might. It's the test I was looking for. This whole game felt like it was building up. As I went through more and more trials, I realized I was getting sharper, stronger, kind of. I was building more and more on my library of knowledge, of physics, of enemy damage, how much distance before I get a running jump,
I know as soon as I enter a scenario what the most likely outcome is. I can take on these 3 if I can properly roll out of the way. This gorilla spawns here, so I'm gonna hit his spawn, retreat,
And let the guns do all the talking. And they talk real funny.
I feel like I understand how the game works and what core design is thinking. I get it. I really get it. Tomb Raider is a classic for a goddamn reason, and if you need the proof, we can indeed compare it against the reboot. I don't usually do this, but I think I get it now. While I thoroughly enjoyed 2013's Tomb Raider for what it was, there was something that bothered me about calling it Tomb Raider. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, but going through the original and letting it speak for itself, well, spoke volumes. Tomb Raider can be defined in that one moment, the image I see in my head when the title is spoken. Standing in that snowy hallway, unsure of what's coming next or what's behind you. In Tomb Raider, you're thrown in. You're there in the depths and gallows of it all. Just this absolute rawness. The reboot seems to misunderstand what made Tomb Raider so amazing. Action movie games are great. Classic Tomb Raider would appear on the surface to also be an action movie game given its characterization and media coverage, but felt so much deeper than that. These are the feelings that I never felt in the 2013 title, which was clearly geared much more towards being cinematic and filled with super melodrama and big explosive set pieces, jump snap to ledges, and you can make your way through obstacles without trying too hard. These scenes were super cool and super fun to play, no doubt. But classic Tomb Raider is a much different beast that defined what the series was and should be given how great it was. I never felt as moved or shaken up by the reboot as I did in the original. Even if it was an origin story, I was left unsatisfied with how reboot Lara never really gained confidence. It's absolutely realistic, and reboot Lara feels perhaps more grounded, but something was just so awesome with how classic Lara handled everything with absolute confidence and ease.
Thank you.
So, while it's definitely a few steps above the 6th generation Tomb Raider titles, which were just better looking with watered down mechanics, the reboot is so far removed from the series' source material, both conceptually and mechanically, that I have to question why it's really called Tomb Raider in the first place. Outside of the basic origin story, they're completely different characters. Classic Tomb Raider defines the idea of the tomb. The tomb isn't really a place, it's an idea. The tomb is everything you're afraid of, taking the next step, making the jump, defeating your enemies, overcoming your worst fears, coming face to face with your biggest obstacles. Those shadows will try to wear you down. The tomb will try to break you, but the tomb forgot one thing. You're the fucking Tomb Raider.